Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about the Gaulus Sector, an Outer Rim sector in the 14th Red Tails Command. Gaulus Sector is one of those sectors whose official name in the Republic bureaucracy makes no sense. Gaulus is a mountainous minor planet with a population under 1 million. It rarely shows up on maps, and it's only notable because it was home to one of the Rebel Alliance's many small Outer Rim bases. It wasn't home to Rebel Command or anything, but they had like one battalion hiding out there before the Empire caught up with them and chased them off. Also in the Gaulus sector is Ryloth, a planet with a population well into the billions, and which almost everyone across the galaxy knows about. At the very least, people know about the Twi'lek, and Ryloth is their homeworld. Why is it the Gaulus sector and not the Ryloth sector? No clue. Ryloth's civilization is clearly visible from space, and it is easily the most densely populated planet in the sector. My only guess is that early Republic bureaucrats were speciest about Twi'lek, who the Hutts view as a slave species, a prejudice which sometimes leaks out to the Republic. Like, Twi'lek slave girls are a valuable commodity in Hutt space, because the Hutts are evil, and that image is compelling enough that some people think of the Twi'lek as an entire species of hot slave girls for the Hutts, and I guess someone who thinks like that was in charge of naming the sector. That's all speculation. All I know for sure is that Ryloth is a major planet with billions of inhabitants, and Gaulus is a gas station with an attached diner. We'll get to Ryloth later, but I want to run down the sector's other notable planets first, since it would be an anticlimax to do them after the big one. Gaulus sector is mostly full of Twi'lek colony worlds like Aloth. There were a couple of rebel bases in the sector, mostly for Saw Gerrera's partisans, like Rhea. The sector also has a system with a really dense asteroid belt. There's no habitable worlds in the system, so it's officially unnamed, but smugglers have built dozens of bases onto the asteroids, and it's unofficially known as Smuggler's Run, so that's kinda cool. Probably the most interesting planet outside of Ryloth is Abdalus. Back in the Old Republic days, Abdalus was a huge hub for corporate activity at the end of the Corellian Run, a place where trillionaires could headquarter their Outer Rim trading and industrial conglomerates without having to play nice with the Twi'lek Clan Council on Ryloth or other Twi'lek worlds. Abdalus was still subject to the Clan Council's government over the Gaulus sector back in the Republic days, but as long as they paid their shipping dues, the clans were pretty happy to let Abdalus's corporate exploitation and the environmental damage of their city factories be the humans' problem. Just because it was in Twi'lek space didn't mean Twi'lek had to actually live there. In the High Republic era, a large fragment of the freighter Legacy Run, torn apart in hyperspace, fell back into real space over Abdalus while traveling at a pretty significant fraction of the speed of light. It hit the planet hard enough to completely obliterate one of the city factories and left an impact crater so massive it destabilized the whole tectonics of the planet. If you're wondering how a freighter could possibly have inflicted that much damage, it's probably because you're thinking of something like a Corellian YT series. This was a Canif Yards Class A. They were enormous. Now, it's not like it was the Death Star or anything, the planet is still there, but earthquakes and volcanic eruptions became so much more common that the whole place was slowly abandoned. The ruins of the cities are still there, toppled and jagged from all the tectonic upheaval, so now the planet's primary export is cool urban exploration videos. Like a lot of species homeworlds, Ryloth has a more varied environment than most planets. It's got wet jungles, arid mesas, and active volcanoes. The constant is that the surface is full of dinosaurs and they all want to eat you. Twi'lek civilization grew out of caves, and most of its older cities are mostly or fully subterranean. Modern technology being what it is, a lot of Twi'lek cities are now fully surface-based. I've heard rumors that Twi'lek have different clans divvied up primarily by skin color, and that some of these clans are more underground than others. This all sounds kind of twee, and I suspect it's at the very least oversimplified, especially since different Twi'lek skin colors are very definitely living alongside one another today, but it doesn't contradict anything that I've been able to verify, so maybe it's accurate? During the Clone Wars, the Separatist theory of victory was that they could link up their spinwards and trailing territories to get a broad control over the Outer and Mid-Rim, and from there fight the Republic to a stalemate, forcing the Republic to recognize their sovereignty over the Outer Rim. They were really counting on the Hutts, traditional enemies of the Republic, to take their side on this, but it turns out the Hutts didn't love the idea of the Separatists sending massive war fleets right through the center of their space, especially since that would have made Hutt space the primary target of the Republic in order to split Separatist forces back into two. When kidnapping failed to solve the Separatist diplomatic problems, who could have guessed, their backup plan was to secure the outer and mid-rim segments of the Corellian Run and the Prelemian trade route, and then invade the slice in between, linking their forces through the mid-rim instead of through Hutt space. This is why Christophsis and Kashyyyk were so important to them. It was their gateway into the mid-rim in the trailing and spinward section of the galaxy, respectively. What this has to do with Ryloth is that Ryloth is the end of the Corellian Run in the trailing end of that theater, which was always the theater where the Seps were in more danger. Their Spinwards holdings were fairly consolidated early in the war, but their trailing territories were packed full of these industrial powerhouses like Solist, Geonosis, Mustafar, Thifera, Bestine, but the Republic controlled so many planets standing between them and their consolidated Spinwards territories. This put Ryloth in a really bad position. They were surrounded by CIS forces early on, but those CIS forces were, in turn, surrounded by Republic space. Once the Republic economy pivoted to feeding the Republic war machine, the trailing theater was going to be smashed, and if Ryloth went SEP, that would include them. But if Ryloth stayed loyal to the Republic, then the CIS fleets nearby would smash them immediately. Ryloth tried to stay neutral, but the Seps needed to play aggressive in this theater to stand a chance, and they knew it. So, they supported a pro-CIS coup. The Republic sent in forces to support pro-Republic counter-coup forces, and the whole planet was a war zone for almost the entire Clone Wars. After the Republic's victory, they installed the pro-Republic resistance leader, Cham Syndulla, as head of the planet. Thing is, the Republic had been reorganized into the Galactic Empire by this point, so of course every major planet needs a few stormtrooper legions on hand to keep an eye on things, especially alien planets. Now, the Twi'lek were pretty well liked as far as aliens go, and Cham Syndulla in particular was really popular in the core worlds. He was the go-to example of a pro-Republic Outer Rim leader, which was important to countering separatist narratives of an oppressed Outer Rim rising up against the wealthy elites of the core. Sure, the CIS was explicitly a corporate oligarchy whose ruling council was made up almost exclusively of megacorporations like the Trade Federation and an intergalactic banking clan. But their propaganda did a lot of work to focus on their parliament and the legitimate grievances that the Outer Rim had against the core. Cham Syndulla's support of the Republic was pretty key to countering that message. But everything changed after the sterilization of Geonosis. See, under the Empire, the real power, the people with the blasters and boots on the ground who actually enforce laws, lay with the Grand Moffs and their Oversector commands. 14th Red Tail's command was led by Grand Moff Ravik. It ruled over 16 sectors, which means, according to Imperial military doctrine, it was supposed to maintain 96 Star Destroyers and their accompanying Stormtrooper legions. The Moffs never even got close to those numbers. The story of the humongous gap in Star Destroyer numbers between Imperial propaganda aimed at the public, Imperial production targets internally, and actual reality is a story for another time. But even having far less than the 96 Star Destroyers he was supposed to, Moff Ravik had a ton of bills to pay to keep these highly advanced, massive war machines maintained, fueled, and their crew and complement fed. When the Emperor was pouring resources into the Oversector because the Death Star's hull was being built over Geonosis, this was no problem. Then the Emperor ran out of patience with Geonosian revolts and ordered the planet sterilized, and the whole of Project Stardust was mothballed for years. It's a damn shame Orson Krennic was such an evil bastard, because the determination and cunning required to keep this thing from being salvaged from materials for half a decade between the sterilization of Geonosis and the Public Order Resentencing Directive was insane. But Krennic wasn't part of 14th Red Tail's command. He was part of the Central Imperial Bureaucracy, which means his success didn't help Grand Moff Ravik pay his bills. If anything, it made things worse. Ravik at least could have had a temporary windfall from selling off the Death Star frame for raw materials if Krennic hadn't saved it and moved it to another Oversector. 14th Red Tail's command would be one of the most underfunded, strung-out Oversector commands for the entire second half of the Imperial era, but Ravik was able to keep the bottom from falling out completely by making under-the-table deals with Zygarian slavers and spice runners answering to the Hutts. Red Tails had always been pretty lackadaisical about enforcing Imperial law regarding spice trade and slavery, especially alien slavery, but after losing Geonosis, Grand Moff Ravik pivoted from ignoring the problem to directly supporting it in exchange for a cut of the profits. With Imperial forces aiding and abetting the slavers and spice runners, it was open season on the whole Oversector, but especially on Ryloth, which has traditionally played a pivotal role as a source of both slaves and spice. Cham Syndulla, Rylothian nationalist that he was, opposed the new policy as best he could, but he wasn't actually in charge, the Imperials were. All Cham Syndulla could do with his legal authority was annoy them. Sure, he could pass laws outlawing practices within the Gaulus Sector, and that would obligate Grand Moff Ravik to invoke emergency powers to overrule those laws, but other than keeping the ghostwriter for Ravik's decrees employed, this didn't change anything. But Cham Syndulla was a guy who made his name running an anti-CIS resistance force, so it didn't take him long to put those skills to use building an anti-Imperial resistance force. His daughter, Hera Syndulla, went on to be a pretty famous pilot in the early days of the rebellion. Without the support of an outside power like the Republic had been in the Clone Wars, the Ryloth resistance against Imperial occupation wasn't nearly as successful. By the closing stages of the Galactic Civil War, though, the ruinous economy left behind by the sterilization of Geonosis had, despite the effort to plug the gaps with spice and slaves, been gutting Imperial garrisons in the Oversector for nearly 15 years. When Coruscant fell over, Outer Rim Moff started scrambling to set up remnant states so they wouldn't face justice in the New Republic, but Grand Moff Ravik had been a weakling and a laughingstock amongst the Imperials for years, so the other Moffs poached his forces, until eventually the Ryloth Resistance was able to seize the planet with nothing but rioters and light infantry forces. They were pretty well supplied with missile launchers and heavy repeater blasters by that point, but they didn't have an answer for AT-ATs or orbital bombardment. By that point, though, they didn't need one. All these advanced war machines had been seized by stronger Moffs or left to rot in their bays. Funny enough, for a planet whose fraught modern history began with a refusal to join the Confederacy of Independent Systems, after the fall of the Galactic Empire, Ryloth became an independent system.